1.3 版本前瞻直播放出了单横隐跃的实际演示，看着这背后庞大的数值以及高额的伤害，不禁让阿白思考，这才1.3版本，崩铁就要开启数值膨胀的时代了吗？
Hey guys, Mr. Pokey here, back with another video. Welcome to another episode of CN Hypewatch, where I will be going through review the CN Bros opinion for an upcoming banner unit, this time featuring Imbibitor Lunae. These are strictly speculations from the CN side talking about his kit. If you guys would like to see CN's perspective on who to pull for version 1.3, kindly check out my previous video on Imbibitor vs Fusion's CN pulling opinions. It seems that patch after patch, most DPS units that come out are getting better and better, Imbibitor Lunae being no exception. If you guys want to see the biggest possible damage number on your screen, feel like a literal god amongst men with a massive 900% multiplier on a single attack that could potentially be maintained every single turn, then Imbibitor is gonna be your man. As mentioned in my previous CN Hypewatch, I'm not here to discredit any of the viewpoints from other content creators since each of them stands from a perspective that holds their own logic and reasoning. This series is not intended to be a guide. For that, please kindly check out my CN unit analysis, which I'll be making shortly after Imbibitor Lunae is released. This entire series is purely opinions and speculations on future units. And with that out of the way, let's just jump straight into today's content. Now let's first discuss Imbibitor Lunae's individual speculations, the first of all being his potential damage output. Based on the trial Imbibitor in the version 1.2 story quest, as well as the livestream events showing his kits, CN Bros actually managed to reverse engineer the potential multipliers for Imbibitor Lunae. Massive thanks for Monggan Tata, one of the biggest CN content creator at Bilibili at the moment. I won't go into the details on how the calculations were derived, but the general consensus is as shown over here. Each skill point pretty much doubles the total damage for the enhanced basic attack. The enhancement from 1 skill point and 2 skill point is lower than 3 skill points. So because of this, CN Bros feel that for most cases, Imbibitor wants to use that 3 skill point enhanced damage for maximum damage per skill point spent. So to put this into perspective, if you were to use 1 skill point enhanced basic attack 3 times, you would deal less damage than a 3 skill point basic attack 1 time. The reverse engineered damage multiplier across 3 targets with 3 skill point, it's a whopping 901%, including the main target and 2 adjacent targets. In comparison, Jingyuan's 10-stack Lightning Lord is currently at 660% with 330% from adjacent targets. Imagine hitting 900% multiplier every single turn with his enhanced attack. Other than his damage multipliers, Imbibitor's toughness bar damage is also extremely high. For 3 skill points, you will deal 4 toughness bar damage for the main target and 2 for adjacent targets. To put this into perspective, a normal skill usually does 2 toughness bar damage, ultimate being 3 and basic attack being 1. So using 3 skill points on Imbibitor Lunae, you get to do 8 toughness bar damage across 3 targets. Upon further calculations to find out Imbibitor Lunae's talent damage percentage buff, since we do know from the live event that Imbibitor's talent allows him to deal more damage the more hits there are. For CN Bros, they use other units as support with their abilities to delay the enemy's turn, and we find out that for 2 and 3 skill points is roughly a 70% damage buff, 1 skill point is a 42% damage buff, and the basic attack is a 28% damage buff. When converted to absolute multipliers based on the number of hits, this is roughly 5 times, 3 times, and 2 times of each stages of enhanced attack. So we know that for the maximum amount of damage percentage that we can gain from his talent is gonna be up to 5 times, since 2 skill points and 3 skill points deal the equivalent amount of hits. Using Silei's 80% damage buff uptime from Resurgence as a benchmark, it is unlikely that Imbibitor's talent damage percentage uptime will be very high. Of course, these insane damage numbers from his multipliers as well as damage percentage buffs comes at a very high price, which is going to be our next topic, skill point management. In the trial, Imbibitor could spam his 3 skill point enhanced attack, so it definitely skews the perception on how frequently players could use his ability. From the live stream event as well as testing Imbibitor on the story trials, the only way that Imbibitor can gain free skill points, or Squama Sacrosancta, is with his ultimate and technique at the start of the battle. Considering that his ultimate cost is the highest in the game at 140, similar to QQ, unless this got changed since the trial version, this will not be a sustainable way to ensure the 3 skill point basic attack every single turn. There are currently 2 different ways CN Bros have came up with to manage his skill point usage. Either through using 3 skill point enhanced attack every single turn, or alternating between 3 skill points and 0 skill points for his basic attack. Now, if we want to use 3 skill points every single turn, Imbibitor without speed boots will need roughly 20 overall skill points per 10 cycles. In 10 cycles, Imbibitor gets 11 turns. Now, Ting Yun and Luocha, both are excellent skill point generators, can only generate 7 to 9 skill points in 10 cycles each. So even if we were to run both Ting Yun and Luocha, we will still have a little bit of a skill point deficiency, leading to a requirement of 3 skill point positive supports to be ran with Imbibitor Lunae. An alternative could be running a high-speed Pella, since high-speed Pella is the only unit in the game that essentially does not need to use skill points at all as long as we do not need to debuff the enemy. So this will allow Imbibitor to be ran with 2 skill point generators instead of 3. Now another way to manage Imbibitor's skill point is to cycle between 3 skill points and 0 skill points for his basic attack. If Imbibitor cycles between these 2 attacks every single turn, then his skill point usage becomes similar to Blade across 10 cycles, which is 11 turns, after factoring in the free skill points generated from his ultimate and technique. Now this rotation can also be comparable to Jingyuan, where Lightning Lord usually takes actions after 2 Jingyuan turns. If we were to play Imbibitor using this rotation, as well as using Bronya as his support, Imbibitor's damage output is estimated to be 1.3 to 1.4 times of Jingyuan's damage output. Now currently in MOC, CM Bros estimates Seelay's damage output to only outdamage Jingyuan by roughly 11%. So for Imbibitor Lunae to deal a 30 to 40% damage increase, even though he is not using his enhanced attack every single turn, is extremely high. Bottom line, Imbibitor Lunae's absolutely insane multipliers can only see its full potential with the proper team setup. And we will be exploring this further in our next topic in team speculations. But before we move on to team speculations, I just want to point out this quick little note that is Musketeer set versus Bandit set. Now this is going to be a very short section since we do not know the actual numbers, the actual performance between both sets, but I felt that it is worth a mention. Although plenty of players have their sight on Bandit set due to its incredible 4-piece effect of 10% crit rate and 20% crit damage on top of 10% imaginary damage, Musketeer is actually a really competitive substitute in CM Bro's opinion, since Musketeer's basic attack damage, attack, and speed are all great buffs for Imbibitor Lunae. Now this will be explained further in team speculations, but Bandit set essentially requires Imbibitor to be ran with Welt in order to extend Imprison's uptime and therefore Bandit's 4-piece uptime. If not, the buffs from Bandit set will not see a very high uptime other than when Imbibitor breaks the enemy. If Imprison uptime is not high, it will only be a 10% imaginary damage versus a permanent basic attack, and speed buff from Musketeer. For this, further testings will be required, so stay tuned to that in CN unit analysis for Imbibitor Lunae. Now moving on to team speculations, we'll be talking about the potential supports that Imbibitor can run with. As mentioned in my previous point as well as my video for Imbibitor's pool value, it is absolutely crucial to manage his skill point usage to draw out Imbibitor's full damage potential. So running Imbibitors to support alongside him, with him being the main DPS, will be the most optimal team composition. It is very unlikely that players will run Imbibitor Lunae as a sub DPS. Now below are some of the suggestions that players can consider when building his team before his arrival. Now we'll first discuss the Harmony units, starting with Ting Yun. Ting Yun only uses 1 skill point every 3 allies turn, and Ting Yun is one of the most skill point friendly Harmony supports that we have at the current moment. Since Imbibitor will likely run attack boots to reduce his skill point usage and increase his overall burst damage, a fast Ting Yun is essential in providing him not only with buffs but skill points. Ting Yun's ultimate is also our only ultimate that can increase the target's energy, which is crucial given Imbibitor's massive 140 cost energy. Across CM Bros, Ting Yun seems to be a really solid pick for Imbibitor. Now another 4-star Harmony is gonna be Asta, but it is unlikely to be as optimal as compared to Ting Yun due to her buffs being focused on speed and attack. Although she is also skill point positive, if you want to have a 3-turn ultimate, you have to use a skill point once and basic attack twice. Attack buff is a really common buff that is provided by other Harmony supports, and Imbibitor does not like speed buff as much compared to damage buffs or crit buffs or attack buffs, since the faster he goes, the more skill point he will use, and this will not relieve the skill point pressure required by the entire team as compared to units like Ting Yun and Pella, which I'll be discussing further later on. Now moving on to Yukong, she is not as skill point friendly as the other Harmony supports, but her buffs are undeniably strong. She has incredible attack, crit and crit damage buffs, a permanent imaginary damage percentage buff from her traces as well as planetary if we equip that, as well as excellent personal DPS capabilities when built like a DPS. If players have an E6 Yukong, skill point management drastically improves as long as you time Yukong's ultimate with Imbibitor's ultimate and enhanced attack. As such, I feel it is not a coincidence that miHoYo placed Yukong in Imbibitor's banner. Now for our last Harmony support is gonna be Bronya. She's also the most skill point heavy Harmony support, but Bronya is and always will be the highest damage increase for any DPS due to extra turn mechanic, especially so for Imbibitor given his absolutely insane multipliers on his 3 skill point enhanced attack. Now that being said, it is highly recommended to first obtain an E1 S1 Bronya, and even then, it will still be a challenge to have sufficient skill points to last throughout the entire match. Players running Bronya would likely need to run a fast Bronya, if not a hyperspeed Bronya, to weave in basic attacks with a skill. To understand how this works, kindly check out my Bronya video where I discuss the different Bronya speed builds. Back to this point, it is impossible to constantly use Bronya's skills coupled with Imbibitor's 3 skill point attack, which will cost you 7 skill points within 3 unit turns. Way too high for the entire team to sustain. Now moving on to some Nihility units, we'll first talk about Pella. She is the most skill point friendly support in the game, and Pella is a permanent AoE defense down debuffer that is completely skill point positive unless you need Pella's skill to remove a debuff. Now similar to Tingyun, any supports that are skill point positive will be a valuable asset to Imbibitor's team comps, and Pella's AoE defense down is also an excellent debuff considering that Imbibitor does have a lot of AoE damage such as his ultimate and enhanced attack on 1 main target and 2 adjacent targets, so all of those will be affected by the AoE defense down. Next, Silver Wolf. Although she uses slightly more skill point than Pella to implant her weakness implant, but she's still extremely skill point friendly. Her debuffs are also a lot stronger, especially against a single target if you factor in the attack debuff, speed debuff, resistance debuff, and defense debuff and all this kind of stuff, or even more if you have Incessant Raid equipped on Silver Wolf. And this will allow Imbibitor to be used in more scenarios for enemies without imaginary weakness once paired with Luocha and Yukong or Welt. And finally, for our final potential supporter for Imbibitor is gonna be Welt. Now, Welt is a very interesting unit because we do have differing opinions. On one hand, players can run Welt as a self-sustaining debuffer with an attack plus skill cycling, so he basically does not use any skill points. Once we are using these 0 skill points, we essentially just want Welt to cast his ultimate as fast as possible, which will allow Imbibitor to make use of Bandit's incredible 4-piece effect. Action value pushback as well as damage taken from Welt's ultimate are all excellent debuffs, especially action value pushback, since this effectively allows our entire team to get more actions in, and more actions in results in more skill points, more buffs, and more turns for Imbibitor to output his tremendous damage. Now on the other hand, some players also feel that running Welt would mean sacrificing a slot for potential support, and Welt's debuffs are only there when he casts his ultimate. Since it's impossible for Welt to complete a 2-turn ultimate without using his skills constantly, his actual effectiveness may not be as high as people expect. This will definitely need further testing to find out if Welt can really pair well with Imbibitor Lunae. After discussing about Welt, we are now moving on to the final topic for today, which is how good is Mono Imaginary when running with Imbibitor Lunae. Now our current Mono Imaginary team is Imbibitor, Yukong, Luocha, and Welt. On paper, this looks really cool, right? Same element, Yukong buffs everyone, Luocha dispels and free heals, pretty skill point friendly, and well as action value delay and imprisons, and Imbibitor just does tons of damage. However, while this theory seems really good on paper, it can be quite far from reality when it comes to actual performance. Because other than Luocha, every single unit in the Mono Imaginary team right now needs to use skill point. Okay, not need, but they will rather use skill points than to use their basic attack. Yukong and Welt, while they can be skill point neutral by doing an auto attack skill cycle, this is still not enough to support Imbibitor's massive 3 skill point per turn usage with Luocha alone. On top of this, cycling basic attack and skills on Yukong and Welt also results in slower energy generation, and both of them have really good ultimates that should have a high uptime whenever possible. Considering that Honkai Star Rail has no elemental team advantages such as faction bonus and all this kind of stuff, and enemies usually have 3 different weaknesses, Mono Imaginary's performance is unlikely to exceed players' expectations, if not outright disappointing them. Now that being said, there is a potential Mono Imaginary comp where we take out either Welt or Yukong and instead slot in Silver Wolf. Now in this case, we can technically run a mono imaginary by using this against enemies that are weak to quantum for Silver Wolf to always imply imaginary weakness. In this case, Imbibitor can always be made use of even if the enemy is not weak to imaginary, which is the main selling point of most mono element team comps anyway. But of course, once again, we will have to leave to further testings in the future. Another topic that players may face is Imbibitor Lunae going to be future-proof? Because there has been a lot of discussions where DPS is the most not future-proof unit. You have to pull for support. Supports are usually way more future-proof. To that, this is what CM bros have to say. 铁打的辅助，流水的主席. This essentially translates into support is a foundation and DPS always come and go, right? Come and go flows just like water. With Imbibitor Lunae, I don't think this is going to be an exception because as any gacha games develop in the future, and we're now talking beyond Honkai Star Rail, but for any gacha games, for a gacha game to create better and better content, usually they will create better and better DPS to scale the difficulty of the content that they're creating. It is undeniable that Imbibitor Lunae is extremely strong right now. Based on his multipliers and all this kind of stuff, he's likely going to be the next best in slot DPS for a really long time. But to say that he's future-proof, that is probably not going to happen. When it comes to team building, you are creating a team to support your main DPS. Your main DPS is going to be the foundation of your team. So because of this, if in the future there comes better and better DPS that does even more damage than Imbibitor Lunae, which we do not know for sure right now, it is quite likely that Imbibitor may get outclassed and get replaced by future better DPS. In comparison, supports are usually very universal, right? I do believe that supports such as Tingyi and Bronya, they can pretty much fit into any DPS team comps. And comparing his future-proofness with, for example, like Kafka's DOT team, right? They are very different because Imbibitor Lunae is a traditional crit ratio DPS. And from what we see right now, every single DPS except for Kafka's DOT comp is crit ratio focused, so it is a lot more likely for Imbibitor Lunae to get power crept by future better crit ratio DPS unit. Compared to Kafka's kit is essentially enabling other DPS. So even if there comes a time where there's better DOT units in the future, Kafka can simply be dedicated to a support. Right? But Imbibitor, like I said at the start of the video, it is very unlikely that he can perform his roles and duties as a sub DPS compared to a main DPS, since all his skills are basically very selfish, right? You want to deal as much damage as possible by using as many skill points as possible. He doesn't really provide that much for the entire team. It's more like the entire team needs to provide for Imbibitor Lunae, right? So that's gonna be the gist of how future-proof Imbibitor Lunae is gonna be. So with that, we have come to the end of today's discussion. Really looking forward to pull Imbibitor and see how he performs in 1 week later. For those of you guys who want to engage in further discussions, feel free to check out my Discord, Poke's Village, where we have a really active community talking about Honkai Star Rail every single day. For those of you guys who would like to check out my Twitch stream, this is twitch.tv/MrPoke, where I will be streaming 2 to 3 times a week, and the schedule will be uploaded on my Discord channel. And with that, we've come to the end of today's content, and I'll see you guys next time. Take care.